After the death of George Floyd a couple of weeks ago in Minneapolis, the spotlight has quite rightly fallen on systemic racism in society. And Lewis Hamilton has been one of the most outspoken on the topic, using his platform for good and demanding change. Now, in a series of posts, I'll give you the gist of one of them on social media. He said, "This week, the world has been forced to confront truth about racism and police brutality. Now is the time to speak up and demand racial equality for all. For those of you already out there fighting, know that I see you and I am by your side." Karun, as one of only two Indian men to have competed in Formula One, I wondered how Lewis's words resonated with you.
I think he was absolutely right to go to the forefront and say things publicly, but also, I think he was right to call out the rest of the paddock and the rest of the sport, which he did. I spoke to a number of people within the sport subsequently who thought it was a bit unfair because they didn't believe themselves to be racist and thought he was generalizing it. But I think that misses the point. Lewis's message really seemed to be that it's not enough to be non-racist. He was calling for people within the sport, especially those with a platform to speak publicly through social media and stuff, to be actively anti-racist. And he was right. And I think that, for those like drivers, who have lots of followers on Instagram and Twitter and all of these things, or the media, it means publicly speaking up to raise awareness of racial biases, which do exist, and to make the wider world, look for signs in day-to-day life, and perhaps get some books and educate themselves on the topic. And I thought it was, we heard Ross saying just before, he thought that Lewis was an excellent ambassador for the sport. And I agree. I think this was another clear sign of that.
Absolutely. I think from my perspective, when you look at people like Lewis Hamilton, you put him in the same mold in terms of sportsmen as Tiger Woods, the Williams sisters, great pioneers within this sport. And as you were saying, Martin, with the social following that he has, he's the one that can give this the loudest voice, isn't he?
Yeah, he's earned the right, hasn't he, without any question at all, through talent, through adversity, hard work, personal risk, and winning 6 world championships in Formula One, to stand up and say the things that he said. And I'm proud of him and pleased that he did, and I support him in every way. And he's certainly made me stop and think it all through. I mean, I haven't earned the right to strong opinions to add to the narrative of this. I'm a white, middle-class, 61-year-old Englishman, and I've not been on the receiving end of racism. I've circulated the world for 40 years. I don't have racist thoughts in any way. Although I had a fascinating conversation where we mentioned it with Karun this morning about how you can have subconscious racist thoughts. And again, that's made me think long and hard about that. I first met Lewis when I handed him a trophy when he was 12 or 13 years old at Buckmore Park. I've never thought of him as a black driver. He's Lewis. We revere him. He's one of the greatest drivers of all time, if not heading towards being the greatest we've seen so far. He's hero worshipped in our world, and we see that at Silverstone when he's carted across the crowd and they run onto the racetrack. But so what it's made me do is I saw a feature just yesterday actually in a newspaper it was Oliver Telly, 12 books you need to read to understand racism, or you could or should read. So I'm certainly going to download some of those and inform myself better to understand and be part of the narrative.
This is a question to both of you. Having heard what Ross Brawn had to say on the matter, do you think that that is obviously a good thing for Formula One to be doing that and actively taking a proactive approach, if you like, to this going forward? What would you like to see change to make our sport more diverse, Karun?
Well, I think Ross hit the nail on the head. It has to come from a grassroots level. I think he's definitely on the right path in terms of starting at karting and F1 in schools. The young kids, the future generation, they're the ones who this is a generational shift that's needed, Simon. It's been a historical issue that's gone on for decades. So I think they've hit the nail on the head by trying to start off with with the kids. Our kids hopefully will grow up in a society, in a world where people are more conscious of it, and they're thinking about it and picking up the small signs. I think that's really important.
Martin?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm pleased we're debating it. And what I'd really love is that if we can in Austria, if Lewis has got some time, sit down with him and understand this more and talk some more about this and give him the platform, and it will help us all.
Absolutely. I mean, Karun, you can do that. You have a platform, as I said, as one of only 2 Indian drivers to have ever competed in this sport. What's your experience about being involved in what's such the sport that you love, heavily white dominated?
I think, first of all, I should preface it by saying that, I grew up in India and I came to the UK or Europe when I was 18. So my experience isn't the same as Lewis's. I don't know what it was like to be the only black kid on the grid as a teenager karting across Europe in the 90s. I didn't experience that. But as you asked about my own experiences, I think I never felt like I was treated differently on the track. For example, in wheel-to-wheel battle, I never felt I was treated differently by the teams. I've always felt as part of the team with any of the 5 broadcasters that I've now worked with in F1. I think it's ultimately I've been judged, I'd like to think, based on my capabilities behind the wheel or my knowledge behind the microphone. And as Ross mentioned before, I feel it's been a meritocratic process in the way I've been judged. But however, at the end, I'll also say that there have been several occasions where I've gone to racetracks. I remember today, a few more people know who I am, but when I was younger in Formula 3, for example, I remember going to racetracks and the security guards spent more time looking at my pass than they would at someone else's. And even today, even recently, for example, races last year, where the odd ones where they do the security check, they could check our bags. And there's a certain tone that you're spoken to. There's a certain way or the number of times that your bag gets searched. It's hard for me to put into words, but unless you've experienced it to really describe it. But there's an undertone there that you feel, certainly. And I think that's an unfortunate part of, the subconscious biases that exist in society on the whole. And this is, as I said before, I think the issues that Lewis is trying to raise, it's unfortunate that there are these biases. The simple example, I remember going to the train station to pick up my wife on a few occasions, and people have got off the train, white people have got off the train and tried to get in the backseat of my car because they assumed I was a taxi driver. Now, I'm not immediately saying or thinking that those people are necessarily racist, and I'm sure they don't think that they're racist, but there's somewhere in their subconscious, it triggers that reaction. And I hope that through this process, it's getting those people to think about perhaps those decisions and the way they live their lives. And I think that is what Lewis is trying to do, is to get people to be a bit more actively anti-racist rather than just non-racist.